Hello there everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be bringing you the third episode in my series that will take on the journey through Dimensions End. Now I know a lot of people have been going through Dimensions End in the hope of getting all those bonus resources that are going to be available throughout July if you manage to complete everything up until D13 before the end of the month. But obviously I wanted to have this video available for people who basically get in at any time so that you guys have a bit of a navigation towards the hardest current content in the game so that you guys can get to the end and get all those nuggets and ingots and all that good stuff while having the bragging rights to say that you've cleared the hardest stuff in the game. So if that's all stuff that you're interested in, today we're going to be covering Dimensions End Tier 7, 8 and 9, then stay tuned and keep on watching. As always, everybody, don't forget to check out all of the social media links in the description box below, including Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Patreon. On Twitch this week, I'll be covering Dimensions End 13 tomorrow, as well as my offline mode on Sunday. And with Dimensions End 13, I am going to be making a video that will cover that as well, but I'm going to include that in my Should You Pull video for Alexander's banners on Saturday. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for that. And I've also put a vote out fairly recently because there were a bunch of Final Fantasies I kind of wanted to start doing on stream so that I had something different to do outside of Opera Omnia. So I put a vote out for everybody, and I'm pleased to say on Saturday I will be streaming Final Fantasy IX, given that it's celebrating its 20th anniversary, and those of you that have followed me for a while know that Final Fantasy IX is my favourite game in the series. So if you wanted to come and check that out and come and watch me play Final Fantasy IX or Dissidia on Opera Omnia live, then come and check me out on Twitch. And then with Patreon, I always shout out one of my patrons at random so that I can give thanks to each and every one of you individually for coming and supporting the channel further, and today that person is going to be Fate. So thank you ever so much for your support, your recent addition to my Patreon, and it means the absolute world to me, so thank you all very, very much. Obviously, don't forget to check out all the various links that I leave in the description box as well for various resources there are out there for Opera Omnia, including Dissidia Info, Dissidia DB, Tombury Troop, and of course Opera Omnia Tracker, which is a newer one that I've added in, which will give you an idea of what other people have done to clear Dimensions End, so definitely check that out. And of course, there's all the other content creators for Opera Omnia besides myself. So we're going to start off with Dimensions End Entropy Tier 7. Now honestly, I believe that Tier 7 is where the difficulty for Dimensions End really ramps up. Now the main key points to note when it comes to this particular tier is that the enemies deal a large amount of HP damage very quickly, and they're very heavy on the debuffs. Basically through Wave 2 and sometimes 3, taking a bravery break from any of these enemies, the Crust Beetles in particular in Wave 2, will result in one of your characters dying, so you need to avoid being broken at absolutely all costs. And then the Wave 2 enemies as well, the Beetles, need to be killed as close to one another as possible, because when one dies, the other suddenly gets a massive surge in stats, and it makes it a lot harder for you to take it down. The first wave is a trash wave, and the only thing you have to really worry about is that they can inflict poison. It's not really a big deal. But Wave 2 do like to give you stat downs, usually your offensive stats, so attack down, initial bravery down, things like that. So you want to try and take them out with decent attackers, so you want to bring somebody that can hit really hard for this particular fight. Wave 3, however, is the nastiest one when it comes to debuffs, because the Behemoth, when you take it down to a certain point in its health, around 2/3 of its health, it then goes into a second phase where it stands up. If you've played Final Fantasy 13, you'll know what to expect here, and recovers all of its health. And then suddenly it starts inflicting much nastier debuffs, including Fog, which shuts off all abilities for the person that it's targeting, as well as lowering all your offensive stats, so that's your attack and your max bravery. It takes your defense down sometimes as well to boot, and you obviously don't want that to happen because it's going to make things much harder for you to clear. So basically you want to bring somebody with debuff evasion along with you. A tank is absolutely fantastic in this particular fight. Zack in particular, I'll go over in a moment, but there's a reason that 90% of clears of this particular tier use Zack, and you want to bring somebody that can deal a very high amount of damage in a short space of time. Now, as you can see on my left here, the clear that I did, I initially actually had a slightly different team from this. I used Zack and Ignis, just like I'm using here, but I originally actually used Aranea, because Aranea's damage is just that powerful that she covers the damage portion of this extremely well, and she does make your life a lot easier. And Tier 7 came out around the same time as Aranea, so she was like the best character to use at that particular time. Time has progressed since then, and we've had more summon boards, we've had character boards, we've had a lot of buffs to our characters that we didn't necessarily have in Tier 7 when it first came out. So there's going to be a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to characters you can use. Now, people used Golbez for like when the tier came out, but I went through this the second time using Zac, Ignis, and Golbez, and I was honestly like, oh my god, I know I'm going to struggle, because I struggled with this so much the first time I cleared it. And honestly, it was fine. Like, it was way easier than I remembered it being. Golbez did extremely well because of his Imperil, being able to deal like high amounts of damage to multiple enemies or single targets as and when they were needed. So in Wave 2, I used his backhand, I can't remember the name of the move off the top of my head. And then for the third wave, I used Rising Wave, which made a huge difference. It was really strong. And then Ignis provided the debuff evasion that I needed him to, as well as like having Overwhelm, which was great for kind of turn manipulation when I needed it. And Zac just basically made it so that it was very difficult for my party to take damage pretty much at all. Ignis was healing the party, Zac could keep on top of healing himself, and Golbez just smacked things about, and it actually ended up working out extremely well. In terms of other characters that you could use, as I've said, Zac is probably the best character to use for this, and as always with the Dimensions End clears, I will leave a link in the description box below to Tonberry Troop and Dissidia info, places like that, so you can go ahead and look for other people who have done clears differently. But where you might not want to use Zac, Snow is really powerful, but he's possibly a little bit too good for this. I mean, I say that, he's as good as Zac, but you're going to want one of those tanks for a later tier. So if you don't want to use Zac, then you may want to consider using Warrior of Light, because while he's not quite as strong as Zac in this particular fight because his damage output isn't as high, he will keep you protected, and he does have healing in his kit, so he can work. Debuff evasion, you have a few different options. I chose to use Ignis because he worked very well for me at 0 out of 3. I only gave him a book, I didn't give him ingots because I didn't feel the need to, and he actually just performed every function that I needed him to in debuff evasion, battery, healing, a little bit of turn manipulation with his EX, things like that. He actually performed extremely well. Selphie also has debuff evasion in her kit, as does Warrior of Light on the odd occasion. It's only a percentage chance, but he can evade certain debuffs as and when by having the Will of Light buff on. Selphie can do the same, and obviously also makes the recharge for your EXs much quicker. Selphie's actually a character that can be used in a lot of different tiers. I actually use her much later, but you can use her here. Aphmau is probably way too strong for this. Like, Aphmau is an extraordinary character, but if you're rushing to get these done, then Aphmau will get that job done. Her damage is incredible. She has auras. She's got, obviously, the debuff evasion to make it so that you can get around that. It's all really, really good. Lena equally is also extremely powerful, like possibly a little too powerful for this, and you're going to want debuff evasion for a later tier, particularly DE11. So as long as you've got somebody with debuff evasion available for that particular tier, then just use whoever you can that has that particular benefit in this tier. And then the third character, honestly, just bring somebody with a really high level of damage. Like somebody, I mean, I used Golbez, I originally used Aranea. Honestly, you could use pretty much anyone here like for high damage, because the enemies don't have any particular resistances. So you could use Aranea, you could use Jack, you could use all sorts of characters. Jack's probably a little too strong. Some people will argue that Aranea is too strong, but quite honestly, I hated this particular tier, so going through it as quickly as possible was an absolute plus for me. In terms of solo clears, I've only seen clears for characters that we currently have available in Kefka and Keita. I mean, Keita should have been released by now, and I will make a short note when it comes to Keita here. Now, because we don't know exactly when she's coming, in terms of doing a should you pull video for her, if you wanted to free up space in your Dimensions End, or if you are struggling to get Dimensions End cleared in time for the July rewards, Keita is absolutely fantastic. Because what she does is she has evade and counter, and she just can do so much by herself. You'll see with in one of the links in the description box, there's so many clears for various different DE tiers just using Keita. The thing I will say though is that her cursed artifacts are extremely important for her, so if you are going to go and pull for Keita, be prepared to go and farm those artifacts if you want to use her for solo DE clears. If you've got teams all lined up for DE 1 through 13, you don't have to pull for Keita. Like, she's a nice addition to have, but if you're wanting to save your resources for other people, you can get away with not having her. She's not absolutely backbreaking, I must have her for all future content, but in terms of freeing up characters and efficiency through your Dimensions End clears, she is actually extremely potent for it. And then, as I say, Kefka is the other character I've seen that can be used here because the HP silence actually does do quite well, and blind in particular, and because he has so many turns due to the speed downs that he inflicts. But you obviously want to make sure, as with any solo character, that they're as maxed out as they can possibly be, so that their artifacts done, that's their boards done. Make sure all summon boards are done for anyone you take to Dimensions End realistically. Character boards are also an option as well. Just try to make sure that anyone that you're going to be taking to something like that is as strong as they can be. So now we can move on to Dimensions and Entropy Tier 8. Now, I would personally argue that Tier 8 is arguably the hardest tier of all of the DEs, purely because it's one of the most specific in the things that you need to bring along, the other one being Dimensions End 12. Dimensions End 8 has ranged resistance, but that's not really a thing when it comes to this, because what you actually need to be bringing is somebody to counter the fact that they have a lot of elemental resistances. So basically you want to bring someone along, we call them an Imperilor or an Enchanter, somebody that can give your party a certain element and then imperil the resistance of that same element to the enemy party, because it gets you around a ton of the mechanics that are used in this fight. The other thing is that they do like to debuffs a lot in this particular fight as well, but they're all non-framed buffs, so it's less important for you to bring along a debuff evade unit and more important for you to just bring decent buffs along. Now, waves 1 and 4, so the first and last, have really nasty delay attacks. Now, the first wave is probably actually the scariest one in some ways, because the two Hum Barbers do like to do really heavy Brave HP attacks, and if they're concentrating on one particular party member, it can spell doom for your run, and it can really just ruin you on the first run. So basically, just take your time with it. Like, it's the first wave, so at least it's the first wave and not the last one, because if you do lose, it's not the end of the world. If you get beaten, if you get killed, then just try again. It's not the end of the world. You can just keep trying. There's no penalty for losing or anything like that. Just keep your cool and just keep trying. Now, like I said, sometimes it will take you out with numerous Brave HP attacks. I tried so many different clears on this particular wave, like when I tried to re-clear Dimensions End so that I could make these videos, and honestly, I really struggled with a lot of different party members, but you may try some different things to what I've tried. Wave 2 is more complicated, because what happens with them, these are actually the bosses from Realms event, and they change their weaknesses depending on what colour they are. So if the enemies are blue, they're resistant to ice and they're weak to fire. If they're green, they're resistant to wind and weak to thunder. If they're red, they're resistant to fire and weak to ice. And if they're yellow, they're resistant to thunder and weak to wind. So the idea is what you're supposed to do is hit them with the element that they are currently weak to, and then that lowers their defenses for the next 4 turns so that you can just go ham on them. However, if you just bring someone that has Imperil and Enchant in their kit, it actually circumvents pretty much all of this, so you don't have to worry about it quite so much. In Wave 4, you have the Kraken and the Celestial Tiamat. Now, the Sand Kraken also does nasty delay attacks, so you have to keep an eye on him at all times, make sure that he's not doing that too often to you. But honestly, the Tiamat is the scary one, because the Tiamat will go with Brave HP attacks from the get-go, will just go ham on your party, and it will charge up a really nasty AoE Brave HP attack with a lot of hits, and it can just kill you outright. It's really problematic, so make sure you summon at the correct time to make sure that you can get around this. Honestly, depending on which party members you bring along with you for this, it can help a great deal in terms of defenses. But this is definitely a tier that is more strict on the party members that you bring along than the tiers before it. Now, the team that I brought along here for this particular fight is a little bit of an odd one because none of them actually enchant the party. However, Edge and Kryl complement each other absolutely fantastically because Kryl's EX imperils Thunder, and Edge's kit is all Thunder based and Kryl's kit is all Thunder based, which is handy. Yuri is a little bit of an oddball, but he is all Holy based and he imperils Holy with his EX. So it makes it so that he's able to keep up with himself and make sure that you're not having to worry about all those various different mechanics. You can just imperil Thunder and Holy and make sure that you're always hitting for weakness damage. The reason that I brought Yuri along is because he has HP regen to the party that's really helpful. He has 100% AoE damage on his EX. He has gravity based damage, which can be really useful because some of the enemies, particularly wave 2 and 4, can suddenly just go, oh, now I have loads of bravery and you have to deal with it. It can get quite scary. Wave 3, because I haven't actually mentioned it, is actually not too bad. It's an Ochu, it summons like mini ads, things like that, but honestly this compared to the other waves in the fight is completely nothing. You can use this as a chance to kind of make sure your stats are where they need to be to take on the fourth wave after the onslaught that was the second. Kryl's Brave Battery proved to be extremely helpful here, but honestly the star of the show here was definitely Edge. Edge's evasion and the ability to function as a tank without actually having to be a tank and still dealing a relatively strong amount of damage proved absolutely invaluable. Blitz Mirage has AoE damage because there's always more than one enemy in each wave, so you're going to be getting a much higher damage output than you would have done with a single target tank. But between Edge and Kryl and Yuri, they just complement each other so well in terms of the buffs they brought, the batterying, the healing. They were just really, really helpful. And obviously with Kryl's Ray of Hope buff, it's increased damage when you're hitting for weakness damage. So it all just made a lot of sense to me to bring this particular team with me. In terms of other characters that you could bring along to this, basically the main thing that you want to focus on is somebody that has the ability to imperil and enchant your party. Now, the most common character you see for this particular tier is Lulu. Now, Lulu obviously has the most consistent kind of fire-based imperil and enchant because it's attached to a 35 and a 15. Not her EX, so she's constantly going to be able to have that imperil down as well as the enchantment across your party, so your party is just always going to be hitting for weakness damage. There are more recent examples of imperil enchanters like Fujin or Garnet, or we're going to have Raijin soon, Lightning as well, but they're all, in my opinion, probably best saved for later tiers, because if you have earlier characters like Lulu or Onion Knight would be another example of characters that can enchant and imperil while still dealing a large amount of damage to themselves, or characters that can just imperil for their own kits, so characters like Lightning or Paladin Cecil, things like that. They will work very well here because you just want to make sure you're keeping on top of your damage as much as possible, because the enemies get very, very resistant to your damage very quickly if you allow them to. Also, like I said, I brought Yuri along here because he has the imperil for his own kit, and he shows a very good example of what I'm talking about in that he can deal a self-sufficient amount of damage without having to worry about another party member's imperil because he does it for himself. Brave batterying I find is very important here, so I chose to use Kryl for this particular fight because her Brave Battery was great and she worked very well with Edge for the Thunder Imperil, so it kind of all added up. But you could also use somebody like Y'shtola, who isn't necessarily needed to deal bravery damage in order to deal HP damage. So for example, she uses Pulse of Life and then Stone. You're still going to get that delay. You're still going to get a decent amount of HP damage. You're just not going to get much brave shaving out of her. So make sure you're bringing her along with someone that can take their bravery down so that you're not getting a massive whack in the face. Penelo, for the same reason as Y'shtola, can also work here by keeping your speed up, by making sure that she actually does have a really strong Brave Shave in Intercession in her EX, because it just reduces their bravery to 0, makes sure that they're easy to break for somebody else, and doesn't actually factor in what their stats are, what they're resistant to. She doesn't care, she just brings them straight back down again. And then the third character I would recommend, or at least the third character type I would recommend, is somebody who can reduce the amount of damage that you're taking. Now I chose to use Edge here for well, he doesn't take any damage because full evasion, but you can also choose to use other characters that have a similar function, even if it's done slightly differently. If you didn't use Zac in tier 7, then he would actually work relatively well here, particularly if you have somebody that can enchant him with an element and imperil that same element to the enemy, because Apocalypse still hits like an absolute bus, and he can still hit very hard whilst keeping the enemy focus onto himself, so that it's a lot easier for you to survive. Porum is another character that can work very well here. Like, some people used Porum when she just had her EX for this particular tier, so now that she's had her EX realization and she's that much stronger, then she's definitely an option for you to take here as well. When it came to solo clears, yet again, we have to talk about Keita. So Keita, while she has all this evade and counter, she actually happens to be ice, like, enchanted herself and can imperil ice by herself as well. So she's another character that could just sit there and you just wait it out. Like, she is actually extremely turn efficient for these DE tiers. So like I said earlier, if she does come around within the next week or so, or within July, hopefully she does, then definitely think about trying to pick her up so that you can get through those DE tiers as quickly as possible. And then lastly, we're going to talk about Dimensions and Entropy Tier 9. Now, the main key factor with Tier 9 is just that the enemies hit really hard and they have a lot of HP. There's no resistances, there's no major gimmicks, apart from the fact that, like, some of the enemies do resist certain elements, so you don't want to be bringing anybody dark related because the Death Riders and the Iron Worm absorb it. You don't want to be bringing ice because the Ice Gigas absorbs it in Wave 2, and you don't want to be bringing earth because the Plant Golem absorbs or nullifies it in Wave 3. So as long as you don't take those particular elements, or even if you do, as long as you can imperil them, then you're golden in terms of that. But the enemies like to hit very hard and very regularly with either AoE bravery attacks or brave HP attacks, which makes them actually very scary. Now, Wave 1 and 2. So Wave 1 has the Death Riders and the Berserker armor, and Wave 2 has an Ice Gigas and an Iron Worm. Now, the threatening enemy in each of these waves is the Berserker armor and the Ice Gigas. However, the Death Riders and the Iron Worm like to heal themselves. Like, they'll put up an HP regen, or in the case of the Iron Worm, or the Death Riders will use drain attacks. And obviously, if they're gaining health, that means that it's pushing you further away from that turn count. So even though the Berserker and the Ice Gigas are that much more threatening in terms of what they can actually do, make sure you keep an eye on those other enemies, because you don't want them healing so regularly that you're going to have to then deal all that damage through them again. If the Ice Gigas breaks somebody, then, I mean, we've fought Ice Gigas a couple of times, but the main gimmick with that is that if it breaks somebody, it will then power itself way up and start dealing AoE brave HP damage and things like that, so it makes it much, much harder to survive. The Iron Worm in Wave 2 does periodic HP attacks. They're gravity based, so don't allow yourself to be set up by the Iron Worm for the Ice Gigas to just turn around and kill you. Now, the third wave has the Plant Golem and the Phantom Mail. Those of you who remember Noctis's event will remember the Phantom Mail well. Phantom Mail is a pain in the backside, to put it mildly. So Phantom Mail, what he tends to do is his first couple of turns he will hide where his turn is within the turn order. So basically you have to be on lookout at all times to make sure that he doesn't just turn around and just go, oh, by the way, Brave HP attack, you dead. You have to be so careful what he's doing, and you can't tell when he's going to do it. So you just have to be extra careful. There are ways of getting around that kind of thing, but honestly, I found the easiest way is just to summon as soon as he actually makes himself invisible in the timeline and just absolutely beast him down, so that if he does come out the other end of it, it's not for very long. The Plant Golem also has delay mechanics, so you have to be really careful of that, and he can actually kill you as well out of nowhere, but he is significantly easier to deal with when he's by himself than he would have been had he been sitting alongside this Phantom Mail that's taking turns and chunks of health off you without you knowing when he's going to come. Now, the team that I've used for this particular fight uses a certain character that probably not many players would use here in Yang. Now, Yang is there for AoE damage. That is all Yang does, and it goes to show that even with characters that perhaps I haven't recommended, there are plenty of options for you to use within these Dimensions End tiers. As long as you play within the parameters of the mechanics of the fight, you can bring pretty much anybody you want as long as you're sticking to those mechanics. So like I said, there's no major resistances or anything here, so if I was gonna use Yang in a Dimensions End, this would be the hardest one I imagine that he could deal with, so I brought him along. I also brought along an offensive support character and a defensive support character in Beatrix and Rosa. Now, Beatrix here is actually fantastic because she has AoE bravery damage on her Thunder Slash. Even though the HP damage is only single target, she's still making sure the enemies are broken and not getting out of control with their high levels of bravery. And then Rosa is, well, Rosa, her auras, her attack and max brave buffs, all the things that she can do, the healing. Between Beatrix and Rosa, you ain't taking much damage, or if you are, you can heal it back very quickly because Saint Cloth makes your defenses go up, and both Beatrix and Rosa are battering you both the whole time. Your Brave Overflow is significantly stronger because of Rosa. She's just a fantastic character to bring along with this, particularly when supporting a character like Yang, who kind of needs that support because he can hit that much harder, and because he has 80% to 100% AoE damage on the majority of his moves. He's actually going to be hitting for a pretty decent amount of damage, given that there are multiple enemies in every single wave. Now, I chose this particular team because I wanted to use, basically because I wanted to use Yang, but originally I changed Yang for Paladin Cecil, and I found that he actually functioned extremely well as well, because as long as he's got his Imperil down, he actually hits really quite hard whilst providing defensive auras on top of Beatrix's defensive buffs, and whilst providing more battery, more healing. Basically, I just wanted to provide this fortress of not taking damage while still being able to dish a large amount of damage back. But then I wanted to prove that you can use a character like Yang in Dimensions End and it still function absolutely fine. In terms of damage dealers, in fact the most common characters that you see here are actually none of the characters that I've used. The most common characters that you see here in terms of damage are those that have turn manipulation within their kit. So characters like Vayne work very well here because he's got the longevity, he's got the attack down aura, which makes it so they're not hitting as hard, and obviously he can kind of play the Phantom Mail at its own game by just re-breaking, playing around with the turn order, making sure that enemies are exactly where he wants them to be so that they act when he needs them to, all while dealing crazy amounts of damage. Aranea works for exactly the same reason, if not slightly better, because she also has massive amounts of HP AoE damage to boot, and she has delay in her kit, she has the re-break, she's taking advantage of the fact that there's no resistances, so if you're using Aranea, she will absolutely rip through this particular fight. Lightning, exactly the same reason, she may well be a single target damage dealer, but because of her ability to take so many free turns, then she's actually pretty good at dealing with multiple enemies as well. She's not quite as good at dealing with wave 1, because there's 3 enemies, but with 2 enemies, it's really not that big a deal for Lightning. In terms of the support characters, basically you just want to, like I said, build up a framework of really powerful sort of like debuffs or buffs that make it so that they're dealing less damage to you. So I've chosen to use Rosa here as well as Beatrix, so she would work, like either of those obviously work. Paladin Cecil, as I mentioned earlier, kind of compounds all those defensive and offensive buffs whilst dealing a decent amount of damage himself. If you didn't use Edge in DE8, he actually works very well here because, well, what better damage to take than 0, right? And then in terms of other support characters, you could bring along Penelo for the same reasons as I said in DE8. Like, she's just good. She just gets the job done. She's just big aura or big buffs, like able to deal a decent amount of damage and able to keep on top of making sure your characters stay healthy. The other characters that I really like using in this particular fight, particularly if you're using Aranea, are characters like Fran. Now, Fran is an attack-based debuffer that also imperils ranged, which makes Aranea hit that much harder. And one particular thing I did see, and I had to make note on it because it's not a character that I have used myself because I didn't have the ingots for him, but I would love to have tried it, is the combination of Fran and Vincent, where because of their attack debuff stacking, it makes their attack like nothing. It's hilarious, and because you're taking Fran and Vincent and then presumably another ranged damage dealer, or even somebody like Irvin can work here, you're just dealing large amounts of damage while they're just like doing chip damage at you, and it's actually extremely entertaining. There's quite a wide variety of characters that you can use in this particular fight, and honestly after DE8 I found this one to be a much simpler affair and honestly a bit more of a breather. In terms of soloing Dimensions N9, the most popular character that people love to use when it comes to soloing this particular tier is actually Shadow. Now, I have Shadow, and I could not get this to work personally. I feel that there is a lot of luck involved due to the nature of Shadow's kit, and that you're not always going to be able to evade absolutely everything, and a lot of people say that they fall flat at the plant golem in wave 3, but there are plenty of videos and clears of people clearing Dimensions and Entropy tier 9 with Shadow as a solo party, and all those videos are going to be in that Reddit link that I've left in the description box below. So if you really want to do it, I think it takes a lot more effort and time than it's possibly worth, but if you're like stuck on characters, you need more characters available to do the later tiers, then soloing it with Shadow is something that you may well want to consider. So that's going to be all for today's video. So now we've covered Dimensions and Entropy tiers 1 all the way through to 9. We've got one more video in this particular series so far left to go, which is going to cover Dimensions N tiers 10, 11 and 12. And I'm also going to be talking about DE13 in my next video, which is going to be my Should You Pull for Alexander's banners, so keep an eye out for that. Obviously, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, share it out, subscribe to the channel and click on that bell for notifications. And of course, don't forget that if you want to come and find me on Twitch or come ask questions on Discord, then you are more than welcome to do so. Anyways, that's going to be it from me. Thank you ever so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you on the next video or the next stream. Take care. Bye bye.